Hi, I'm Marty Mathias. I'm one of the co-founders of I Suspect Fraud. Today we'll be talking about why you should implement a tip line. Secondly, we'll be talking about the I Suspect Fraud process. Third, we'll go through some of the features of I Suspect Fraud. Fourth, we'll cover some frequently asked questions, and then we'll end on some pricing options. All right, let's get started. The first topic I'm going to be covering is why you should implement a tip line. I'm going to be quoting some figures from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners and the Ethics Resource Center, who do annual studies on the impact of fraud in organizations. First, fraud is expensive, and it's happening. Did you know that about 41% of private sector employees have witnessed some sort of unethical behavior in their workplace in the last 12 months? Secondly, the median fraud loss is about $145,000. That's a lot of money to a lot of businesses. Third, small and medium-sized businesses, defined as less than 1,000 employees, experience much more frequent fraud, and it's much more expensive than their larger counterparts. Second point is tip lines are effective. Did you know that year in and year out, tips are almost 3 times more likely than the next leading method to detect fraud? Secondly, organizations with a tip line are going to have median losses that are about 41% less than those that don't have a tip line. Third point is organizations with tip lines detect fraud about 50% quicker than those that don't have a tip line implemented. The mere presence of a tip line is going to be a deterrent to fraud. You don't even need to have a tip to have it be effective. It's the thought that someone's always watching me that could potentially mitigate the risk of fraud. Finally, about 80% of employees will report a fraud if they feel a strong connection to work support services. What does that mean? That means that if the employees feel that management cares about fraud and is going to do something about it, i.e. having a tip line in place, they're going to be much more likely to report that fraud. The next section we're going to be covering is the I Suspect Fraud process. There are 3 steps to this process. First, if I'm an employee and I witness some unethical behavior that I want to report, I need to submit an incident report. I can do that either via the website or via our 1-800 phone number. I'll need to provide our unique company ID and PIN in order to associate it with the company that I'm employed at. Then we're going to get into some incident details. What are we going to ask for here? We're going to ask for the date of the incident. We're going to ask for the location if that's relevant. We're going to require a detailed description of the incident, including who was involved, have I reported this before, things of that nature. Finally, we'll be asking the employee whether or not they choose to remain anonymous. The final step of the I Suspect Fraud process is management's review of the incident report. As I said earlier, I Suspect Fraud will send the incident report to 2 identified members of company management. Management needs to do a couple of things with that. First, they need to determine if it's even fraud related. Second, they need to determine if there was enough information that was provided in the report to even investigate the claim further. And finally, if there was enough information, management needs to determine a plan to investigate that incident report. We offer easy implementation. What does that mean? We're going to provide you a number of training materials, including posters, customized business cards, and email templates that you can use to describe the service to your employees and what they need to do in order to submit an incident. We're going to provide management reporting. On a quarterly or semi-annual basis, we're going to send you a summary of all the incidents that have been reported to I Suspect Fraud for your company in that time period. We offer guaranteed anonymity. If your employees don't want to be identified, they won't be identified. Finally, I Suspect Fraud was developed by and affiliated with fraud investigation professionals who have a number of years of experience in this area. We know fraud happens, we know it's expensive, we know tip lines are effective. As we've developed I Suspect Fraud, there are a couple of questions that come up time and again. For example, someone may say, I don't work in the accounting department. How does fraud apply to me? The answer is, while accountants do commit their fair share of fraud, fraud isn't just limited to the accounting department. There are issues such as overstating hours on a timesheet, theft of company inventory or assets such as computers, misuse of a company credit card, overstating expense reimbursements, just a few of the examples that aren't limited to the accounting department. Another question I get about tip lines, especially from business owners, is if I implement a tip line, aren't I really just creating an atmosphere where my employees are encouraged to snitch on each other? The response that I have is the tone at the top of an organization is really one of the strongest internal controls you have. A tip line is going to reinforce to employees that management cares about and is going to do something about fraud. It's not about snitching on each other, it's about being honest with one another. Let's talk about the pricing for I Suspect Fraud. Your I Suspect Fraud service agreement will run 12 months at a time. In the first year of the agreement, there will also be a one-time setup fee. The pricing for your services is going to be dependent on a number of items, such as the number of employees you have and the number of locations. You'll need to contact us for a detailed quote. I will say that when you compare the cost of having an I Suspect Fraud tip line to the cost of having a fraud occur at your company, the tip line cost is going to be minimal and pay off dividends in the long run. Now that you know many of the details about I Suspect Fraud, we'd appreciate an opportunity to sit down with you to discuss it further. We believe a tip line can help you protect your assets.